Just looking at the box scores will never be enough fantasy football research. So how about I help you out and give you my top 5 insane statistics that I have found so far with my offseason research about the 2023 NFL season. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? There's no need to adjust your screen. The playoff beard is officially gone. I feel 10 pounds lighter and 10 years younger, but I had to keep the beard for my Michigan football team and my Detroit Lions while they were both in the playoffs. And now that that is over, it's time to get rid of it, and I'm feeling much better right now. And y'all can stop making fun of me for looking so old. But in today's video, it's time to talk about my top 5 insane statistics that I have found during my offseason research so far this year. And we do this at the end of every season. We dive into a lot of the stats, a lot of the research, and we look for these different things that maybe we didn't see throughout the year. And now it's time to break some of those things down. But before we hop into those insane stats, we're going to be doing an awesome giveaway for the Super Bowl over on Instagram. We've got an autographed Deebo Samuel helmet that we want to give away. And if you want a shot at that and to see how to enter, grab your phone, open up your Instagram app, go search for the Fantasy Headliners, and you're going to see everything that you need to do to get entered into that drawing right there on your screen. All right, let's talk about insane stat number 1. And if you've been around the channel for a while, you know that when we look at wide receivers, one thing that we love to talk about is yards after the catch. We love players at any position that can give you those extra fantasy points and do well with the ball in their hands. And one guy that seems to be really overlooked every single year as one of the top potential wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, kind of had that breakout year this year, finished as the wide receiver 3, and one thing that he did well yet again was yards after the catch. Now this season, Amon-Ra St. Brown led the entire NFL with 677 yards after the catch. That ended up being good on average for 5.7 yards after the catch per reception. We know that it was one of the best things that he does as a wide receiver. He's going to make some deep plays, but a lot of those plays are going to turn up because you throw the ball to him anywhere between 8 or 10 yards down the field, and he absolutely lights it up for several more yards after that. He's one of the best in the NFL at doing that. But what's one name out there that you may not have realized that competed with him in that same area? Well, it was Rashee Rice, who finished 4th in the NFL with 656 yards after the catch. But clearly Rice didn't put together the big volume season that Amon-Ra St. Brown did. And it's one of the reasons why he didn't finish as high as Amon-Ra St. Brown. But when you take a look at the per reception numbers, it gets a little crazy. Because even though Rashee Rice only finished 21 yards behind Amon-Ra St. Brown in yards after the catch, his yards after the catch per reception was much higher at 8.3 yards after the catch per reception. Now, Rashee Rice got a lot of love towards the end of the year, but if you look at his entire body of work this past season, he wasn't really looked at as being a guy that was consistently giving you the fantasy production that you would have liked. He didn't have his first top 24 wide receiver week until week 5, and he didn't have his first top 12 wide receiver week until week 12. Prior to that top 12 performance, Rashee Rice in weeks 1 through 11 was only the wide receiver 41 on the season. But after that top 12 performance in week 12, Rashee Rice did great things the rest of the year, finishing as the wide receiver 6 on the season from week 12 through week 17. It feels like the same conversation continues to be had about the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Since they got rid of Tyreek Hill, they really haven't had that deep threat to stretch the field and open things up everywhere else. And I think a lot of people only look at Rashee Rice as kind of a big play guy, someone that goes down the field. But in reality, these numbers show us that Rashee Rice could end up being a guy that wins all over the field. Because of his yards after catch, he's definitely a guy that can find some explosive plays, not just down the field, but in the middle of the field as well. And if Rashee Rice can continue the trend that we saw at the end of 2023, what do you all think? Let me know down in the comments below. Do you think he's a top 12 wide receiver in 2024? maybe he could be. In 2023, Christian McCaffrey, from a fantasy perspective, had one of the most dominating performances that we've ever seen from a running back. And it's not just based solely on the numbers alone, but it's the fact that he gave you a full healthy slate of games and how far in front of every other running back that he finished. Really, when you take a look at it, it was Christian McCaffrey and then Raheem Mostert for a majority of the year. And one thing Christian McCaffrey does very well, yards after contact. He finished with 929 yards after contact. Good for second most against running backs. And here's just a little bit of an extra stat for you. Number one was Derrick Henry with 930. But for Christian McCaffrey, that ended up coming out to 3.42 yards after contact per attempt. For as much volume that Christian McCaffrey got, that is a huge number for him to put up on a regular basis. Now, up until the final 3 weeks of the season, a majority of you probably couldn't figure out when was the best time to play Breece Hall and when was the best time to set him, because he absolutely had a roller coaster of a season until he ended up winning a lot of fantasy matchups at the end of the year. And for Breece Hall, he had 761 yards after contact this year. Now, if you look at that number compared to Christian McCaffrey, obviously there's a pretty large gap there. And you could attribute that to the fact that Christian McCaffrey had a lot more of a workload, especially to begin the year, than what Breece Hall did. But Breece Hall averaged 3.43 yards after contact per attempt, 0.01 points ahead of Christian McCaffrey. Breece Hall, coming into this season, had he been fully healthy, likely would have been one of the top running backs picked in all of fantasy football. And heading into 2024, his dominating finish to the season and a lot of underlying stats that we'll talk about throughout the year will make him a top 3 pick in next year's drafts. Now, obviously, I mentioned it when I first started talking about this segment. Breece Hall had a lot of up and down performances this year. In fact, he finished with 8 performances that had less than 10 fantasy points. Christian McCaffrey finished with 0 performances with less than 10 fantasy points this year. Breece Hall finished as the RB4 on the season. Not only does that show you how dominating Christian McCaffrey was for a full length of the season, but it shows you how dominating Breece Hall could be in those matchups where he put up big points. A lot of times this season, it was either bust or go big with Breece Hall. Now, hopefully next year when Aaron Rodgers comes back healthy and maybe this offense operates with a little bit more consistency, we see some more consistency from Breece Hall as well. But we know those big performances are there, and we know that he could give us some top-level production. For anybody that had Breece Hall on their fantasy roster, you were probably sweating over a lot of performances and a lot of weeks where you didn't know if he was going to give you the type of production that you needed to win that week. And you know what? If for some reason Breece Hall isn't more consistent next year, I've got something that could help you out with that. Our new friends over at Mando have an awesome line of deodorant that you can use anywhere on your body. Your pits, your package, your feet, anywhere else that you know that you sweat. And the best part is Mando is clinically proven to help reduce odors for up to 72 hours, which has been great for me in season because I spend the entire weekend sweating how my picks are gonna go. And right now, if you wanna try Mando for yourself, you can get $5 off of their starter pack by using code word headliners when you head on over to shopmando.com. Throw that in your cart and then check out. That $5 is essentially 40% off of their starter pack. And like I said, I've been using this stuff for months now and I absolutely love it. So I highly encourage you all to give Mando a try as well. The gold standard at the tight end position for the last several years has been Travis Kelce. And I know 2023 wasn't his best performance. And a lot of you that drafted him in the first or even second round definitely didn't feel like you got the return on the value that you really wanted. punted. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Travis Kelce, from an offensive standpoint, is used better than a majority of tight ends in the league. This past season, Travis Kelce ranked 9th among tight ends, running a route on 91.3% of Kansas City's offensive snaps. And 280 of those snaps ended up coming out of the slot, 7th most among tight ends. Now, there were some tight ends that finished a lot higher. Cade Otton is one of them, who ended up playing in the slot and ended up playing more snaps than what Travis Kelce did. But they weren't really utilized as much, which is unfortunate because when you take a tight end and move them out to the slot a majority of the time, they're kind of looked at as being an offensive weapon for you. They're not really used on the inline blocking and doing a lot of those things. They are being put in a power position to be a receiving weapon. So when you see a tight end out in the slot quite a bit, that typically spells good news. And now this tight end had his moments this season, and he wasn't exactly the fantasy superstar that a lot of people thought that he could be. But Dalton Kincaid found himself running a route on over 93% of Buffalo's offensive plays, which was good for 4th most in the league among tight ends. 298 of those snaps that he played, he also played out in the slot. That was the 4th most snaps in the slot among tight ends this year. Now, over the years, there's been a few guys who have broken that narrative on rookie tight ends. Sam Laporta this year had a great season. Kyle Pitts from a couple of years ago, and Evan Ingram when he was with the New York Giants a few years before that. But typically for rookie tight ends, it takes some time. Now Dalton Kincaid did end up finishing as the tight end 12 this season, so it wasn't a total loss. But for a majority of the year, he didn't give you a whole lot of fantasy viable performances. But this Buffalo offense could end up changing quite a bit next year. Stephon Diggs doesn't seem happy. He could be a trade candidate. It feels like he has been for the last couple of years. Gabe Davis is a free agent and likely headed on the way out of town. And maybe this offense is going to kind of revamp the way that they do things with a new offensive coordinator in Joe Brady, who took over at the end of the season. We'll see how things shake out for the Buffalo Bills. But for Dalton Kincaid, it does feel like he's on an upward trajectory towards being a way bigger fantasy asset than what he was this past season. All right, let's venture over to the quarterback position for a few minutes. And when you talk about the quarterback position, you really think a lot about the deep passing plays. You pick up a ton of points, obviously, on those for your quarterbacks, but then your wide receivers are getting a ton of points as well. And over the last few years, really the gold standard when you talk about the deep passers in the NFL, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen come to mind, Jalen Hurts. But in 2023, there's a changing of the guard, and it was actually a rookie who was the most impressive taking shots down the field. And that was rookie C.J. Stroud. Now, his 57 attempts of 20 or more yards down the field actually only tied him for 14th among quarterbacks. But he made a lot out of those attempts. His 32 completions of 20 or more yards down the field tied him for 3rd in the NFL, and his 1,111 passing yards on attempts 20 or more yards down the field was 2nd in the NFL. In fact, he was the only quarterback this season who attempted 45 or more passing attempts 20 yards down the field and had 0 interceptions. The only quarterback to do it. But as impressive as those numbers are, it's not even the insane stat here. That actually belongs to Will Levis. Now, Will Levis didn't get his shot until later on in the season. He only attempted 255 passes this year. But of those 255 passing attempts, 57 of them were 20 or more yards down the field. That was good for a percentage of 22.4. That was by far the highest average among quarterbacks who attempted at least 100 passing attempts this season. The next closest player with 100 passing attempts was Nick Mullins, with 16.2% of his passes being 20 or more yards down the field. And while we can anticipate that number balancing out a little bit, it's also important for us to look at the quarterbacks that played a big chunk of the season. So when you take a look at quarterbacks that had at least 400 passing attempts this year, there was not one single quarterback that had a percentage of deep throws higher than 15%. So even if Will Levis does average out just a little bit, Levis still could end up having one of the highest percentage of deep passing attempts next season. Now, it's also going to depend on what the Tennessee Titans look like next year. What's the run game going to look like? They've already talked about maybe wanting to actually bring back Derrick Henry on another contract. Are they going to add another wide receiver? There's going to be some good ones available in free agency. Will Levis is going to need a lot better team around him to turn all of this volume into success. Just because he's throwing it down the field a lot doesn't necessarily mean it will translate to fantasy points unless he has the right guys around him. All right, insane stat number 5 is going to be a quickie, and we're going to talk about team stats here. Because when you take a look at the NFL this past year, there were 9 teams that scored 400 or more points. Now, there were 2 teams tied at 10. The Indianapolis Colts and the Cleveland Browns, who each scored 396 points this year. But then if you take a look at the top 15 teams in the NFL in terms of points scored, so the 15 teams that scored the most points this season, there was only one team that had a negative point differential, and that would be the Indianapolis Colts. While their offense was able to put up 396 points this year, their defense allowed well over 400. And because of that, it led to them just missing out on the playoffs. But this was also a team that dealt with some injuries throughout the year and that could be in a much better position next season, especially on offense. It was unfortunate that Anthony Richardson missed a large chunk of the season. But for the chunk that he was healthy at the beginning of the year, you could tell that this offense was going to be way more dynamic than what we saw. And not to take anything away from Gardner Minshew, because he did a pretty good job this year. But just think about this offense next year with Josh Downs having another year to grow, hopefully a fully healthy Anthony Richardson, and hopefully a fully healthy Jonathan Taylor as well. Being tied for 10th in most points scored absolutely could end up going a lot higher. And if this team is putting up more points and they do anticipate their defense getting a little bit better, we're going to look at an offense that absolutely will have the opportunity to control the ball and put up a ton of fantasy points for our team as well. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. Currently, my top 5 most insane stats that I have found in my off-season research. Make sure you do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but make sure you stick around all off-season long and keep consuming the content. For those of you that have not consumed off-season content in the past, it will absolutely make you a better fantasy player. So make sure you have those bell notifications on, so anytime we drop new content, you'll know about it right away. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna go ahead and get on out of here. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.